There is no such thing as the right to vote. Perhaps before I continue, I should define what a right is. A right is the ability to not be subjected to an action of another individual or group. Rights may not be granted by anyone or anything. They come from within. Such rights include the right to life, the right to own property, the right to express oneself freely, and so on. Some people claim they have a right to food, healthcare, housing, or a certain standard of living. I would ask them how they could possibly have a right to these things. In order to have a right to food, you need to have the ability to force someone to give or make you food. In order to have a right to healthcare, you need to have the ability to force a doctor to treat you. In order to have the right to housing, you need to have the ability to force someone to build you a shelter. In order to have a right to a certain standard of living, you need to have the ability to force someone to pay you to maintain that standard. Does anyone have the right to use force to compel other people to do something for their benefit? Voting is much the same as these other proactive rights. Governments have made it a privilege to be a part of the majority. The majority claims the authority to impose its will upon a minority. There is no regard for the right of people in the minority to not be compelled to act in a certain way. In this sense, voting is nothing more than a veiled act of violence. Voting is simply the most acceptable way that people can justify slavery. Lysander Spooner accurately identified that when he said, "A man is no less a slave because he is allowed to choose a new master once in a term of years." The majority quite literally has empowered itself to enslave the minority. So I suppose the question is, how do we counter this assault via the ballot box? Well, Spooner had something to say about that as well. In truth, in the case of individuals, their actual voting is not to be taken as proof of consent, even for the time being. On the contrary, it is to be considered that, without his consent having even been asked, a man finds himself environed by a government that he cannot resist, a government that forces him to pay money, render service, and forego the exercise of many of his natural rights, under peril of weighty punishments. He sees, too, that other men practice this tyranny over him by the use of the ballot. He sees further that if he will but use the ballot himself, he has some chance of relieving himself from the tyranny of others, by subjecting them to his own. In short, he finds himself, without his consent, so situated that, if he use the ballot, he may become a master. If he does not use it, he must become a slave. And he has no other alternative than these two. In self-defense, he attempts the former. In other words, it is possible to, at the very least, vote to prevent further enslavement. And at best, it is possible to use the vote to diminish the effect of that force already levied against you. One way or the other, voting is still not a right, but a privilege afforded to you by a government in exchange for your rights. It is rare that a government allows the voters to empower themselves to reclaim their rights, but when that happens, people should always seize the opportunity. Voting will unfortunately be the only way by which people can retain what few liberties they are left with. Next time you go into a voting booth, please ask yourself, am I voting for violence? If you really enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you really liked the video, please share it with a friend. If you really like this video, please consider sending me some Bitcoin. Making these videos takes some time, and even just a few Satoshi here and there helps more than you'd think. See you next time.